6 years gone, and yet Willow Creek looked exactly the same except colder. The tires of Clara's aging Corolla crunched over the gravel shoulder just outside the town limits, sending a thin plume of dust into the crisp November air. The last of the maple leaves clung stubbornly to the bare limbs, flickering like rusted coins in the wind. As she turned off the highway and onto Main Street, the buildings came into view, familiar storefronts painted in the same muted colors, their window displays already decked in garlands and faded autumn wreaths. The bakery still had a chalkboard sign out front, advertising hot cider and molasses cookies. The old post office leaned slightly to one side, as if sighing under the weight of time. Clara clutched the letter from her grandfather, still unopened, tucked in her coat pocket like a secret. She hadn't been back since the fall her mother passed. The town had called then too, church bells, casseroles, hands on shoulders, but it hadn't felt like a homecoming. It felt less like one now. The letter had arrived 3 weeks earlier, its envelope thick and pale cream, addressed in Grandpa Walter's slow, deliberate handwriting. No return address, no explanation. Just, read when you're ready. She hadn't been. Not until yesterday. Joe's Diner sat on the corner of Elm and Main, its blue awning still sun-bleached and fraying at the edges. She pulled into the narrow space by the side window and killed the engine. The warmth from the vents faded almost instantly, replaced by a fine chill that slipped through the seams of her coat. She wrapped the scarf tighter around her neck, brushed her hair behind one ear, and stepped inside. A brass bell over the door jingled. The smell hit her first coffee bacon grease and something sweet. Her boots squeaked against the checkerboard tile. For a moment no one looked up. Then from behind the counter a voice said, "I'll be darned." Clara turned. "Hi, Hank." Hank's face broke into a wide grin, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "Well, Clara." "May, look what the north wind dragged in." "Come on. Now don't stand there like a stranger. You sittin' at the counter or takin' a booth." She smiled faintly. "Booth. Please, if that corner one's free." "For you? Always is," he said, grabbing a menu, even though they both knew she wouldn't need it. Black coffee and a slice of whatever's under that pie dome. He winked. "Apple crumb, warmed up with that little dollop of whipped cream you used to pretend you didn't like." She slid into the booth, the cracked red vinyl cushion groaning beneath her. Outside a pickup rumbled past. Inside the radio, hummed an old Patsy Cline song through static. Clara let her hands warm around the ceramic mug Hank placed in front of her. No sugar, no cream. Just hot and black, the way Grandpa drank it. "Thought we might see you," came a voice from across the aisle. Gloria, her old neighbor, sat 2 booths down, a knitting bag at her feet and a mug of tea in hand. Clara blinked Gloria. "Hi." The woman's smile was soft, but tired. "I was wonderin', word travels quicker than snow round here. Sorry about Walter." Clara nodded. "Thanks. He thought the world of you. You know, never stopped talking about that orchard of his. Kept it better than his blood pressure." Clara smiled politely, unsure what to say. "Benji's doing good," Gloria added. "That scholarship. He got it, the one Walter helped set up. Didn't say much about it, but I figured you'd want to know." Clara's eyes lifted. "I didn't realize he applied, didn't know he was eligible, neither till Walter pulled some strings." Gloria sipped her tea, said, "Quiet kindness lasts longer than speeches." Before Clara could respond, Hank slid the pie in front of her. "On the house," he said. "Just promise you won't vanish for another 6 years." "I'll try," she murmured, sliding a folded 5 under the sugar jar. A little more than usual. The way she'd seen Grandpa tip since she was a child. After finishing the pie, she stepped back outside into the sharp, late-morning air. The car started on the second try, engine coughing before settling into its weary rhythm. The house on Miller Street hadn't changed much either. The same peeling shutters, the same iron bell on the porch Grandpa used to ring when supper was ready. But it felt emptier now, less haunted than hollow. Clara parked out front, keys in hand, breath curling into the air like smoke. Inside, the warmth was weak and stale. She flipped the light switch. Nothing. The electricity must have been turned off, or perhaps Grandpa never needed it anymore. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon oil and dust. On the counter lay a stack of unopened mail, a wooden bowl of dried apples, and one item out of place. A bright yellow sticky note, its ink faded. "Don't forget the root cellar." She paused. The handwriting was his, slanted steady. The house creaked as she moved down the hall, stepping lightly over the loose board near the vent. Her fingers brushed the banister as she passed the stairs, knuckles white in the cold. She reached the back door and stepped out toward the shed behind the garden. The soil was hard, the flower beds bare. Grandpa's workshop stood at the edge of the yard, its door ajar. The scent of old pine and machine oil drifted out to meet her. Inside, the air was still. She turned on the single hanging bulb. It buzzed and flickered before casting a pale yellow glow over the workbench. Tools hung neatly on pegboard. Jars of screws, rubber bands, mismatched nails lined the shelves. A plaid flannel coat hung by the door. Her throat tightened. She walked to the peg where a pair of gloves hung. Faded green canvas, the palms dark with decades of use. She reached out and touched them. They were stiff cold but familiar. Beneath the workbench, a pair of muddy boots still sat untouched. She stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of the quiet pressing against her ribs. Outside wind stirred the dry leaves into motion. In here, time didn't move. "Well, well," the prodigal finally returns. Lydia didn't smile, just adjusted her designer trench coat and said, "So you made it in time for the will." Clara stepped fully into the living room, brushing the chill off her shoulders as the door clicked closed behind her. The air inside the May house held the memory of apple pie, reheated and slightly overcooked, and the faint sharpness of lemon polish. A weak fire popped in the hearth, licking half-heartedly at the logs, casting thin shadows on the floral wallpaper that hadn't changed in 2 decades. Lydia stood by the fireplace, arms crossed over her chest, freshly manicured fingers tapping against her coat sleeves. Her hair was curled into soft, deliberate waves. Makeup flawless as always, a glass of Pinot Noir rested on the end table beside her, already half gone. Clara caught a note of her perfume in the air, something floral and expensive clashing with the room's faded doilies and the smell of smoke. "Wasn't sure if your city job gave you time off for small-town ceremonies?" Lydia added, voice feather-light but barbed. She turned and walked toward the old family buffet where a photo album lay open. Clara said nothing. She slipped off her coat and draped it over the back of the nearest chair, smoothing her sweater as she sat down. The seat cushion sagged with a familiar groan. The quiet between them was long and brittle. "You're still wearing that coat." Lydia gestured toward the worn fabric. "I mean, I get vintage." "But that's straight out of a garage sale," Clara offered a faint smile. "It's warm." Lydia laughed once, dry and sharp. "Well, fashion has never been your battlefield." Clara's eyes wandered to the album on the buffet. Her fingertips drifted toward it, lifting the page carefully. College photos of Lydia lined the glossy spread. Homecoming debates, a sorority formal. The next page, presumably meant for Clara, was blank. The edges curled slightly, adhesive unused. "I don't think I've seen this album in years," Clara said softly. "Mom started it after high school. Kept it going until..." Lydia trailed off. Well, she got busy, I guess. Or stopped including me, Clara thought, but didn't say. Outside, a car door slammed. Clara glanced towards the front window just in time to see a navy sedan pull away from the curb. She caught a glimpse of Gloria bundled in her coat, waving gently from the sidewalk before continuing on. Clara gave a small nod in return. She still talks to you? Lydia asked Gloria. I thought she moved on after the garden club fell apart. We crossed paths at Joe's diner this morning. She never liked me, Lydia muttered more to her wine glass than to Clara. Thought I was too polished. Clara opened her mouth, then closed it. Instead, she stood and walked over to the bookshelf where the family kept old board games and cookbooks. Her hand hovered over a red binder. Grandpa's planting journal before moving past it to a wooden box labeled Holiday Photos. She pulled it down carefully. The lid creaked open. Inside, amidst the faded Kodak envelopes and handwritten Christmas tags, was a single photo tucked between two recipe cards. She slipped it out. The edges were curled. The color faded to the warmth of memory. It was a picture of her and Grandpa Walter. Clara around 12, her jeans muddy at the knees holding a spade. Grandpa beside her in his battered hat, his hand resting on her back. They stood beside a newly planted apple tree, both smiling. Clara turned it over in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. She grew the roots, not just showed the fruit. Her throat tightened. A knock on the door made both women jump slightly. Clara turned to see the front door open halfway. A man stepped in, briefcase in hand, coat still dusted with the last golden leaves clinging to autumn ladies. Thomas Weller greeted, voice warm but efficient. Sorry to drop in unannounced. Lydia swept toward him with a smile far more polished than the one she'd offered Clara. Thomas, I wasn't expecting you until Thursday. I know, he said, gently setting his briefcase on the hall table. I just wanted to confirm everything is in place for the reading. Thanksgiving morning, as Walter requested. Clara's eyebrows lifted slightly. He chose Thanksgiving. Thomas nodded. He felt it would be the only time the whole family would be together. His eyes darted briefly toward Lydia, then returned to Clara. He wanted it read over breakfast. How festive, Lydia said dryly. What's he going to leave you? She turned to Clara with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. His turnips. Thomas didn't smile. Walter was very specific in his requests. Lydia poured herself more wine. Thomas opened his briefcase and pulled out a sealed manila envelope. He also asked me to deliver this personally before Thursday. He extended it toward Clara. She hesitated, wiping her hands on her sweater as if to steady herself, then took it. What's that? Lydia asked. Thomas turned slightly toward the hallway. There's one more envelope Walter wanted Clara to read first. In the quiet of the lawyer's office, all you could hear was the rustle of a page and Lydia's foot tapping. The room smelled faintly of dust and cedar polish, its corners filled with late morning sunlight that filtered through cracked Venetian blinds. Thomas Weller's office hadn't changed in years. The same framed diplomas hung slightly askew on the wood-paneled walls, and the old Remington typewriter still sat proudly atop his filing cabinet, long retired but carefully dusted. A radiator hissed gently beneath the window, releasing a puff of warm air every few seconds, with the persistence of an old man's sigh. Clara sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, her posture straight but relaxed, her face unreadable. Across the room, Lydia adjusted her silk scarf and crossed her legs, the click of her heel hitting the wooden floor on every bounce of her foot. Thomas cleared his throat. We'll begin. Lydia offered a tight smile, then raised an eyebrow at Clara before glancing down at her phone screen. Dark. I assume we'll keep this short. Thomas, I've got a turkey brining and guests arriving by 2. Clara said nothing. She wasn't sure if she could speak, even if she wanted to. Her grandfather's envelope still sat unopened in her purse, the weight of it almost absurd for such a small thing. Outside, beyond the wavy glass of the window, the sidewalk was empty save for a few dry leaves skittering by. Somewhere down the block, church bells began to chime the hour. Thomas adjusted his glasses and pulled a cream-colored document from a folder. Walter May's last will and testament was notarized and signed in accordance with Vermont state law on October 28th of this year. It reflects his final wishes. He looked up briefly. Lydia smiled again, this time with clear expectation. Thomas began to read, "To my granddaughter, Clara May. I leave the contents of my home at 44 Miller Street, including but not limited to the structure, land tools, journals, assets, and my orchard." Clara blinked. "To Clara May. I also leave the bank accounts held in my name and all residual assets not otherwise designated." Lydia's foot stopped tapping. Thomas continued, "I make no provision for any other beneficiary." Silence. Lydia leaned forward. "I'm sorry." What Clara's breath was shallow. Her hands stayed frozen in her lap. Thomas flipped to the next page. Walter assigned Clara as his power of attorney effective 2 years ago. All health care and financial decisions have been reviewed and documented. There is no evidence of coercion or incapacity at the time of signature. He left her everything. Lydia's voice cracked like glass under pressure. "The house, the orchard, the money, everything." Thomas closed the folder gently. "That's correct." Lydia stood abruptly, knocking her purse off the side table. "He must have been manipulated. You got to him when he was sick, didn't you? Whispered to him about roots and gardens and guilt?" Clara finally looked up. Her gaze met Lydia's, steady, unblinking. "I wasn't even here," she said quietly. "That's exactly how you did it," Lydia snapped. From a distance. Like always, Thomas remained calm, unmoved. "I can provide notarized records of Walter's state at the time. This was his decision, Lydia." Outside the office, a shadow moved across the frosted glass. A small face, Benji. Gloria's grandson peered in curiously before ducking out of sight. The radiator groaned. "I hosted every holiday," Lydia continued, voice rising. "I arranged his appointments. I kept this family respectable. While you—" she gestured at Clara. "You played gardener from 1,000 miles away." Clara stood. Her voice remained low. "This wasn't a contest. Then why does it feel like I lost?" Lydia grabbed her coat and swept out of the office, the door slamming hard behind her. Clara remained still for a moment, the warmth from the radiator brushing her ankles. Then she sat back down slowly. Thomas reached into his drawer and pulled out a small envelope, hand addressed, the edges softened with time. "Walter left this for you." She took it carefully, running a thumb over the seal. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside a single piece of paper. "You didn't inherit it. You carried it." The words struck her with unexpected force. Not pride, not triumph. Something simpler. A recognition. A stillness. She folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. Outside the window, Gloria walked by, basket in one arm, scarf trailing behind her. She glanced up, caught Clara's eye, and gave a subtle knowing nod. The office door swings open. Lydia returns with a thin envelope of her own, face pale. "You manipulated a dying old man," Lydia hissed loud enough for half the cafe to hear. Hazel's Hearth Cafe wasn't the kind of place where scenes unfolded. It was a quiet kind of establishment, checkered curtains, polished booths, and a chalkboard menu that hadn't changed much since the Bush administration. But on Thanksgiving Eve morning, as the scent of cinnamon and fresh biscuits wafted through the air, conversation dwindled into silence. Lydia stood just inside the doorway, her voice still reverberating beneath the cafe's low ceiling. Her coat hung open, scarf tossed over one shoulder like it had been flung there in a rush of outrage. Several patrons at nearby tables had paused mid-sip, their coffee cups hovering uncertainly in the air. Clara sat at the corner booth, hands wrapped around a warm mug, her back straight. She didn't flinch. Across the room, Hank, the owner, glanced up from his station behind the register, brow furrowing. A server paused beside the refill carafe, shifting awkwardly between tables. "I said," Lydia repeated, stepping closer. "You took advantage of a man who trusted you. Behind our backs. Don't pretend this is about family. It's about control." Gloria, seated in the booth just across from Clara, raised her voice gently. "That's enough, Lydia." Lydia turned on her. "Oh, please. You've always had a soft spot for her just because she brings you tea bags in winter." That girl, Gloria said calmly, "came to my porch every Sunday for 2 years, helped me move firewood when my back gave out, paid my heating bill last January when the furnace busted and I couldn't keep the place warm." Her voice held no heat, only memory. She didn't ask for thanks. She never said a word about it. The room was quiet again, but the kind of quiet that leans forward. Clara's eyes stayed on her mug. "She was just trying to be kind," Gloria continued. "And that man, your grandfather, he saw that." Lydia crossed her arms tightly, lips pressed into a line. "You all think she's some kind of saint because she kept her mouth shut. That's not nobility. That's manipulation." "No," came a quieter voice. "That's grace." Benji stood near the counter, one hand gripping the strap of his backpack. He looked small but resolute, like he'd been waiting to speak for longer than he knew. "She helped me apply for the Orchard Scholarship," he said. "Said I didn't have to tell anyone. I only found out it came from Mr. Walter because Gloria told me after he passed." Someone at the far end of the cafe muttered, "Well, I'll be—" and a few heads turned toward Clara with new eyes. "She didn't just help," Grandpa Benji added. "She helped me. She helps lots of people." Lydia blinked, caught in the unexpected sharpness of the boy's words. For a moment her posture faltered. From the booth near the window, Pastor Jones rose slowly, his weathered hands smoothing the front of his wool cardigan. He walked over and slid into the booth beside Clara without a word. The loudest truths, he said after a long pause, are often the quietest lives. Clara looked at him. There was no sermon in his voice, just gentle weight. Lydia reached for the sugar packet holder in the middle of the table. Her fingers trembled slightly as she snatched one and slapped it onto the table, the pop startling a few nearby customers. "I'm not finished with this," she muttered. Then she turned on her heel and walked out the cafe door, jingling hard behind her. No one spoke for a moment. Gloria sighed and reached for her tea. "She'll come around." Clara nodded once. "Maybe." Benji gave her a small smile before grabbing his muffin and disappearing out the door, trailing the scent of cinnamon behind him. Outside, the town stirred quietly. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long golden beams across the sidewalks and storefronts. Clara returned home alone, walking instead of driving. Her shoes clicked against the sidewalk in soft rhythm, her breath visible in the late afternoon chill. The backyard was quiet, the garden bare and brittle under the weight of coming winter. She moved toward the old bench beneath the oak tree, the one Grandpa used to sit on while peeling apples. Its wood was worn smooth, the slats slightly warped. She lowered herself slowly, the air still as breath. And there it was, just beneath the seat. A thin envelope taped carefully to the underside, the handwriting unmistakable even from a distance. It was marked "What Matters." The shed creaked open like a story waiting too long to be told. Clara hesitated in the doorway, her hand still on the rusted handle. The morning sun spilled across the backyard in long golden slants, catching on the frost that glazed the grass. Thanksgiving Day had dawned quiet and sharp, the air crisp with that stillness only early mornings knew. The hinges groaned again as she pushed the door wider. Inside, the familiar scent of earth-old wood and something faintly herbal enveloped her like a blanket stored too long in a cedar chest. Grandpa's garden shed had always seemed like more than a workspace. It was a haven, a retreat, a place where thinking was allowed to be as slow as planting. Dust floated in the sunlight, curling between hanging spools of twine and shelves lined with jars of screws and weathered seed packets. Everything was where it had always been. A rake leaned against the far wall beside a chipped watering can. A faded Red Sox cap hung on a nail above the window. It felt like he'd just stepped out for a moment. Clara exhaled her breath, ghosting in the cold air. In the far corner beneath a blanket of burlap and a folded tarp, something caught her eye. She knelt, fingers brushing away the dust until a brass latch gleamed through. It was a trunk, old oak and heavy with a small brass plaque screwed into the front, CM. She sat back on her heels, blinking. Then slowly she undid the latch. The lid lifted with a sigh. Inside lay rows of notebooks, their covers soft and worn. Her grandfather's garden journals, each one labeled in neat handwriting. Spring 2015. Fall 2016. Tomatoes, seed, variants, and on. She lifted one, flipped it open. Sketches of rows, rainfall notes, harvest counts. But it wasn't all practical. Along the margins, little thoughts, Clara said. Marigolds keep the rabbits out. She might be right. Or let Clara choose the apple variety next time she likes things tart. Beneath the journals was a bundle of folded drawings, hers, crayon-scribbled carrots and apple trees from when she was no taller than a shovel. He had kept them all. And then at the very bottom, wrapped in a muslin cloth, was a folded sheet of thick paper. She unfolded it carefully. A map, hand-drawn, of the orchard, of the... Her eyes scanned the notes in pencil, new rows, planned ideas for expanding toward the fence. Little marks labeled future shade, and one neat circle in the northwest corner marked Clara's tree. A lump rose in her throat. Next to the map, tucked into a sealed envelope, was a letter. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Clara sat cross-legged on the cold wooden floor, letter in hand. She opened it slowly, unfolding each crease like a ritual. The paper crackled in the silence. Thanksgiving Day. 1 year ago. The top read, "Dear Clara, if you're reading this, I imagine I'm no longer there to nag you about wearing gloves or watering too much. You were never loud, never one to take up space just to be seen. But I saw you always did, in the little things, the way you watched people, the way you gave more than you had. People like Lydia chase light, but you, Clara, you root things, you hold, you nourish. You didn't ask for the orchard, you became it. I didn't leave it to you because of sentiment. I left it because I knew you'd listen to what it asks for. Soil has a memory, and so do we. With pride, always. Grandpa." Clara folded the letter slowly, holding it against her chest, the warmth of it spreading even through her coat. A knock came softly against the open frame of the shed. She turned. Benji stood there, bundled in a jacket 2 sizes too big, cheeks pink from the cold. He gave a sheepish smile and raised a small cardboard box. "Gloria said you might need help setting up tables for dinner." Clara stood and nodded. "Thank you." He stepped inside, eyes wide at the shelves and jars. "This place is cool." Clara smiled faintly. It was his favorite room in the house. As she reached to close the trunk, her hand brushed something wedged into the side panel. She paused, then pulled it free, a slim envelope, pale blue. On the front, in the same careful hand, Lydia. She stared at it for a long moment. No seal, no decoration, just the name. She slipped it carefully into her coat pocket, the edges tucked beside Grandpa's letter. Footsteps sounded outside, slow and uneven. Clara turned just as Lydia stepped into the doorway of the shed, her cheeks red, her eyes redder, and a cardboard box of old photo frames clutched tightly in her arms. "He left me a letter too," Lydia whispered. "It doesn't scold it. Asks me to stop performing." The backyard was hushed under a thin November sky, the bare branches of the apple trees stretching upward like prayers. A soft wind rustled the folding tablecloths, their red and white plaids fluttering gently above borrowed metal chairs. The smell of roasted turkey mingled with fresh cornbread, and something sweet, likely Gloria's cranberry relish, made the way she always insisted with orange zest and memory. Clara stood near the old stone path, sleeves rolled up, hands dusted with soil. A few guests had already arrived. Neighbors, mostly familiar faces, who had known the orchard longer than they had known its new owner. Pastor Jones had brought a basket of soft rolls, and a quiet smile. Benji set down a pie box on the end of the table and offered a wave. Gloria carried a vase of mums, and despite her age, arranged them with perfect balance. Lydia hovered at the edge of the gathering, looking small in a gray wool sweater and jeans that didn't quite match her usual elegance. Her face was free of makeup, her hair tied back in a loose twist. The box of photo frames sat near the porch steps unopened. Clara approached slowly, her boots crunching over the frosted lawn. Lydia held out the pale blue envelope. "He wrote it before the will, probably before everything went sideways." Clara nodded but said nothing. "I read it this morning." Lydia's voice cracked. "He didn't tell me I disappointed him. He just asked me to listen more, prove less." They stood in silence, the wind moving between them like a third presence. He said, "I was always reaching for perfection," Lydia added. And missing what was already whole, Clara touched her pocket where her own letter still lived. He had a way of seeing quietly. Lydia looked out toward the orchard. "What are you going to do with it all?" Clara followed her gaze. "Grow something." By the time the sun reached its early afternoon peak, the backyard had filled with warmth, not from the weather, but from presence. Folding chairs scraped against old flagstones. Children ran between the trunks of bare apple trees, their boots leaving prints in soft dirt. Plates clinked and cups of cider steamed gently against mittens and calloused hands. Gloria stood near the middle table, clearing her throat gently. "If it's all right," she said, lifting her glass of cider. "I'd like to offer grace." Everyone quieted. Pastor Jones nodded. Gloria closed her eyes. "For the ones we loved who rooted us, for the ones we carry now, and for what we will grow together." Murmurs of amen followed. A soft chorus of old hymn lyrics drifted on the breeze, half-remembered words about harvest, about home later. Clara slipped away from the main table and crouched beside a crate she had tucked near the tool shed. She opened it, reached inside, and removed a folded piece of paper, Grandpa's orchard map. She scanned the delicate pencil lines until her eyes landed on the spot in the far corner. Benji's tree. She walked to where he stood quietly sipping from a ceramic mug, too big for his hands. "Hey," she said, offering the map. "He saved this for you." Benji's eyes widened as he unfolded the paper. "For me. He wanted you to have your own place here." Benji blinked hard, nodded once, and held the map like a treasure. At the table, Lydia laughed genuine and unguarded as she lifted a bowl of mashed sweet potatoes and offered seconds to an elderly neighbor. When someone reached to help, she waved them off and said, "I've got this before," quietly clearing another stack of plates. As the afternoon stretched toward its golden end, Clara stepped toward the oldest tree in the orchard, its trunk-wide bark thick and furrowed like the palm of a hand long worked. She reached into her jacket and removed the final envelope, small yellowed with no name on the outside. Just a few faded letters, to the one who carries on. She didn't open it. Instead, she tied it carefully with twine to a low branch, letting it sway slightly in the breeze. Behind her, voices laughed, footsteps shuffled, cider was poured, and forks scraped pie tins clean. As the sun set, a light snowfall begins. Clara smiles. He'd say it's time to plant. Sometimes the quietest endings echo the loudest truths. Clara didn't claim the orchard by force or inheritance. She became it through small acts of care seen only by those who chose to look beyond the surface. Kindness offered without fanfare often roots deeper than judgment ever could. Like a lantern left glowing on a winter porch, it lights the way home not just for ourselves, but for others who've lost their way. If this story gently touched your heart, consider sharing a moment of quiet kindness with someone who needs it most.